It was a quiet Saturday afternoon when I found myself walking through the old part of the city. The streets were narrow, with cobblestones under my shoes and soft light between the buildings. The air smelled like freshly baked bread from a nearby bakery, mixed with a faint scent of rain that had fallen earlier that morning. I didn't have any special plans that day. I just wanted to walk, to breathe slowly, to spend some time with my own thoughts. I turned a corner I had never turned before, and there it was, a small bookstore hidden between two taller buildings. The shop sign was made of wood, slightly faded, and above the door were the words, "The Old Page." I stopped for a moment and smiled. There was something charming about the way the letters looked, simple, elegant, a little worn by time. I could see a few books displayed behind the window, old novels, travel guides, poetry collections. The glass reflected the street, but I could also see the warm yellow light inside. Without thinking much, I pushed the door open. A small bell above it rang softly, making a pleasant sound. The air inside was warm and smelled of paper, dust, and something like coffee, maybe from a small pot somewhere behind the counter. It was the kind of smell that makes you want to stay for hours. The bookstore was not big, but it felt full of stories. Tall wooden shelves covered the walls, and every shelf was crowded with books of different sizes and colors. Some were new, shiny and smooth. Others were old, with yellow pages and soft corners. In the middle of the room, there were a few armchairs, old but comfortable looking, with soft fabric and wooden arms. A small lamp stood beside one of them, its light golden and calm. I started walking slowly between the shelves. The floor creaked gently under my feet. I ran my fingers over the spines of the books, feeling their textures, some rough, some smooth, some with elegant letters printed in gold. There were books about history, art, travel, languages, and old collections of short stories. Each book seemed to whisper its own tale. In one corner, I found a small table with second-hand novels. Their covers were faded, but the titles were beautiful. There was something romantic about holding a book that had belonged to someone else before you. I imagined all the hands that had opened those pages, all the eyes that had read those words, all the quiet evenings they had shared with those stories. After a while, I reached the back of the store. There was a wooden counter there, and behind it stood an elderly man with kind eyes and silver hair. He wore a dark sweater and had reading glasses resting on the edge of his nose. He looked up from the book he was reading and smiled. "Good afternoon," he said gently. His voice matched the place, soft, calm, and welcoming. I greeted him back, and we exchanged a few polite words. Then I told him how beautiful his bookstore was. He smiled again, as if the words made him happy. He told me that he had owned this shop for over 30 years. He said he had always loved books, even as a child, and one day decided to open a place where people could come to feel at home among stories. While he spoke, I looked around again. The books seemed to listen too. There was something magical about this place. It felt like time had slowed down here, like the world outside had stopped for a moment. I told him I was looking for something special, a book I had been trying to find for a long time. It was an old novel that my grandmother used to read to me when I was little. I remembered the cover, the color of the pages, even the smell of that old copy. But I had never been able to find it again. He nodded with interest and asked for the title. When I said the name, his face lit up. He disappeared into a back room, and I could hear the sound of boxes being moved, the soft shuffle of pages. A few minutes later, he returned holding a book in his hands. It was the one. The same blue cover, the same elegant gold letters, slightly faded with time, I took it carefully, almost afraid to breathe. The texture felt familiar, like touching a memory. When I opened it, the smell of old paper filled the air, warm, soft, a little sweet. It was exactly like I remember. I smiled and thanked him. He told me that this copy had been sitting on his shelf for years, waiting for someone who truly wanted it. He said that books sometimes find their readers, not the other way around. I like that thought. While I was paying for the book, we talked a little more. He told me stories about people who came into his store, travelers, students, artists, each one leaving with a different book and a different story. He said his favorite thing about owning a bookstore was watching people's faces when they found the book they didn't even know they were looking for. Before leaving, I noticed a small coffee pot and 2 cups on a shelf near the counter. The smell of coffee had been in the air since I arrived. He offered me a cup, and I accepted gladly. It was simple black coffee, rich and aromatic. We stood there for a while talking about old books and rainy afternoons, about how reading can make you travel without moving at all. When I finally stepped outside again, the light had changed. The afternoon sun was lower now, turning the city golden. The bell above the door rang softly behind me as I closed it. I stood there for a moment, holding the book close to my chest. The air outside felt fresh, and I could still smell the coffee on my hands. I walked slowly down the street, feeling peaceful. The book was heavy in my bag, but it was the kind of weight that feels comforting, like carrying a piece of your own story with you. The world seemed quieter, calmer, as if it knew I had just found something precious. When I reached home later, I made myself another cup of coffee and sat by the window. The sky was beginning to turn pink. I opened the book carefully, and as I read the first lines, it felt like time folded, like I was back in my grandmother's living room, listening to her voice as she read to me. It's strange how a single book can bring back 100 memories. The sound of pages turning, the feel of the cover, the rhythm of familiar words, all of it wrapped around me like a soft blanket. I read for hours, lost in the story, in the comfort of something both old and new. When I finally closed the book, night had already fallen. The room was quiet except for the soft ticking of the clock and the faint hum of the city outside. I looked at the book again and smiled. Some days, life gives you small miracles. Like finding a forgotten bookstore, a kind stranger, and a piece of your own past on a dusty shelf. I decided that next Saturday, I would return to the old page. Not because I need another book, but because I wanted to be in that quiet, magical place again, where stories wait patiently, and where every visitor finds a little piece of themselves hidden between the pages.